world! Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial. I know I mentioned it in my first video that I would be doing some tutorials in the future. Currently I am creating my cosplay costumes for May the MCM Expo in London. I'm making two costumes at the moment, one of which is Tails from Sonic. The other one I'm doing is Nightcrawler, the original comic version. Currently about 2/3 of the way through my Nightcrawler costume and potentially about halfway through my Tails costume. So I chose to cosplay Tails because he is my favourite character in the, well, in Sega generally. I always like cosplaying the characters that are my favourite. So far I've done my favourite character from Zelda, which was Sheik, my favourite character from Sonic, which is Tails, and my favourite X-Men, which is Nightcrawler. Without further ado, here is my tutorial to make Tails' tails. Okay, so some of the materials you're going to need, obviously some fur fabric. I have been searching for ages to get the right fur colour from eBay or from any store at all. I've been to a lot of fabric stores near me. None of them seem to have the right shade of orangey yellow. And eventually I found this really appropriate coloured gold material fur fabric on eBay. I got, I think, 4 meters of the stuff because I am kind of covering my entire body in the fur. Today I will be teaching you how to make a tail that looks a little bit like this. One of the things you'll need is, of course, white fur fabric and golden orange fur fabric. Obviously if you're applying this to your own design of a tail, then any colour fabric you need. Short pile, long pile, it doesn't really affect it. Please excuse the fact that this is basically finished, this tail, but I only got to the point of actually doing a tutorial at the point where I basically finished both tails. First of all, I got some foam board, but with this step you can use paper, you can use anything you're able to draw on to make a template for the tail. I used foam board because I had some lying around, so it was a cheap option for me. And so that worked out well for me, but you can actually use just a giant sheet of paper, depending on how big the tail is. I sort of planned it out a little bit on a piece of paper beforehand, and then I drew the real size onto a piece of foam board. Once you've got the shape that you want, you then draw the detail. If you've got two different colours of fur that you're going to be intertwining, you draw the shape of the colour that you're going to be using aside from the main tail colour. So this obviously is going to be the orange section, and then this is the white section. So I drew them separately and cut them out separately as well. So that's your template for the white, your template for the gold. So that's fine. So lay the fur down, fluff down, onto your floor and layer this on top of it. What you need to do is get a pen. It's a similar colour to the fabric. I used this Sharpie marker in a golden orange. Because my fur was quite a thin material on the back, I didn't want it showing through if I used like a black marker, so I used the colour that my fur was. And I drew round, giving about an inch sort of quite a wide berth to the actual shape, so that you have enough to sew first, and then when you turn it inside out it will be the right size and shape that you wanted it to, and it won't be really tiny and skinny. What you want to do is lay it down one side, and then because you're going to be attaching it to the same shape but parallel, you want to turn it round and draw it on the other side as well. You can do both outlines one after the other. You can do it in any order that you want, just get them all ready first. Okay, another thing with the fur, when you're drawing around your templates, you really want to make sure that you have the fur going in the right direction. Obviously you want the fur to be travelling down the tail. You don't want one side travelling a different direction to the other side, so that's something to bear in mind when you're turning the fur over in order to draw on the back. The materials you need for the next step is, obviously you'll be cutting your fur out. You don't want to use scissors because if you use scissors they cut sort of both sides of the fur, which means they'll be trimming the pile of the fur as well as the back, and that isn't an ideal situation. If you're able to get your hands on a Stanley knife or any sort of craft knife at all, then that's a really good idea. Also, you might want to lean on a piece of wood, or if you've got one of them green grid type cutting boards, then that's absolutely fine as well. That's even better actually. So I used the wood and a craft knife in order to cut the back of the fur. Once your fur is cut, as you can see, I've cut it quite a straight edge, but there's still fur sort of sticking out and all that sort of thing. You will need to either hand sew or use a sewing machine to join the two pieces together. Once you have the fur shapes cut out, you'll need to join them together by facing the fur into each other and having the flat back material outwards. From there, you make sure they're parallel to each other, you make sure they're the same shape. You will need a sewing machine. This is my little sewing machine that I used for the tails. Very effective and really helpful because hand sewing is a bit of a nightmare at times, and it's a bit less reliable if you're just weaving in and out and tacking it. So this makes sure it's strong, it has a strong hold, and you don't end up seeing any bits of stitching when you stuff the tail later. Okay, something that I've found that I didn't actually remember to follow from the tutorial that I watched. Basically, I would recommend that once you have one flat bit of material and then one flat bit of material of the other colour as well, you would want to join them together before you sew both sides together, if that makes any sense. I made the mistake of sewing two pieces together, ready to turn inside out, before sewing the white bit on. So as you can see, I've had to sew it sort of like hand stitch. It looks a bit bodge job, but on the outside, luckily, it ended up not looking so drastic. But I'd highly recommend you sewing these pieces together the same as you're sewing that, but sewing that first to the separate pieces. So I don't know if that makes much sense, but if all else fails, you can use my method, and it still works fairly well, just not as well. As you can see, I sewed it along this line. It's nice and pinched, and I kind of gave it about a centimetre. You can give it, depending on how far you cut the fur away from the template, means that you've got that much give, so it's a bit easier. If you go a bit jagged, as I did there, then you've got a bit of leeway, so it makes it a bit easier for you. So once you have sewn both sides together, you now have an inside-out sock, as it were, of a tail. This is my inside-out sock of a tail. Right, all you have to do now is turn it inside out, of course. Another thing to bear in mind when you're sewing the two pieces together is to leave a nice gap on one side, preferably the underside of the tail, so that when you sew it up later it doesn't look as bodgy, it doesn't show the last ditch attempt to sew it up once you've stuffed it. So yeah, that's something to consider. Oh, it looks like a like.
Watch out!
This is taking me forever. Another thing to mention is, obviously, while I'm doing all of this faff, because obviously Tails has two tails, you will want to replicate this and do it at the same time. So do this twice over, but at the same time each stage. So I made mine parallel to each other, so that they looked exactly the same, so they were done in the same sort of breath, as it were. Alright, it's giving birth to itself slowly, so once you've turned it inside out or outside in, or whatever you want to call it, we'll make sure the fur is all still intact and happy and still good. And now you have this positive looking lovely piece of fur. Now you can stuff it as firm as you like. I have stuffed this one so that it's got a tiny bit of give, but not much. It's pretty springy. We have this. Now I'm going to stuff it. Because I'm a bit of a nightmare, I accidentally bought way too much stuffing for my purpose. I thought, well, if I'm going to be stuffing it very, very firm, I'm going to need a lot because it's going to need to pack down really tightly. I was wrong because I bought this monster. Oh, wrong. Upside down. I bought this monster of thing. And believe it or not, that little bit that I've used up at the bottom was all it took to make my tail. Chances are I'm going to have at least 2/3 of that left over, but luckily in my case this is a good thing because I have plenty more costumes coming up which will probably need this stuff. That is 1 kilogram of create and craft hollow fibre filling. It's from Dunelm Mill, which is a place nearby, but if you haven't heard of that place, if you don't have a Dunelm Mill anywhere near you, or if you're in a different country and that shop doesn't exist, I'm sure you can get it from various shops online. You can probably get it, you can get it from eBay, so therefore there is a universal way of getting this stuff. So I'd say maybe you'd need 500 grams maximum if you're going to just do these tails, but it's always nice to have some left over, so that's always good. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do now is just stuff the tail to make it look like it's a sibling. We'll leave that one just there for a little inspiration. And I'm going to stuff the tail from this little opening. I didn't leave that much room, so I will have to get my arm right down into it, into the end, but it seemed to work for the other tail and I didn't rip any of the stitching. At the end we will just, what I believe is called blanket stitch, I'm not sure. It's sort of like embroidery stitching, just looping around, and we'll do that and it sort of closes up the hole. I continued to stuff up until the point I've stuffed some of it inside there as well, ready to close up and then stitch just across there in a loop style. I have done so on the other one. I will show you the result of that. This is how that stitch looks. It's a little bit messier than obviously the turned in stitching that goes on there, but because it's going to be underneath the tail, or you'll only see it from the side, it's not such a big problem. So we now have two stuffed identical tails, which will sit side by side like this. I for one am very, very pleased with how they've turned out. Thank you very much for watching, guys and girls. If you found this tutorial helpful, please give the video a thumbs up and comment below if you have any ideas for future videos for me. By all means, subscribe to see any more tutorials, lip syncs, vlogs and anything else that I might come up with. I have a few things in the pipeline, so keep an eye out. So it's a goodbye from me and a goodbye from Tails. E.T. out. See you. Cannot see me, I am invisible. Ring, 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 ring. Banana phone. Do, do.